Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Qualogy Tech Series. Today we have Grant Ronald, Senior Director of Product Management for Oracle Digital Assistant Development Team. As he's been doing all things conversational for the last 7 years at Oracle, he's been with Oracle for at least 25 years. So yeah, without further ado, Grant, take over the screen and have a good one.
Absolutely. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, let's get up and running. So thanks very much for coming along. As you were introduced, my name is Grant Ronald and I work in the Digital Assistant Product Management team at Oracle. Been here for 25 years at Oracle, involved in many products in the development side of Oracle, including Oracle Forms and Java and mobile and cloud, and for the last 7 years, Digital Assistant. So what I wanted to do in this session was, rather than just talk about building a pizza chatbot or something, how and why are conversational assistants important to Oracle, and how are we actually building conversational assistants here in Oracle? So I'm going to do lots of demos. So there's maybe 12 or so slides just to introduce the concepts, but I want to look at showing you a digital assistant we ourselves have developed, my team, and this has actually become the blueprint as a best practice for many of the digital assistants that are built in Oracle. And I'll show how we built that and how we test it and its kind of overall usage as well. So the first thing is, what's a digital assistant? So digital assistant or chatbot or skill or conversational assistant, whatever it might be, what we're saying is it's any computer system that you can communicate with using natural language. Now, to me, this is exciting stuff because this is the stuff of Star Trek and sci-fi, where people talk to computers and they get the right answer. And I think ultimately that's it's the evolution of where I think we're really starting to go now. Obviously, many of you using things like Alexa or Bixby or any of these Google Home type of assistants as well. But just imagine that in the enterprise. I mean, for example, recently I've opened up a couple of headcounts in my team, and I'll be honest with you, it's not always straightforward finding the right HR web page in order to open up the required head count and then get it advertised and then do all the right things, and there's terminology you don't understand. I mean, what I really want to do is say, Oracle, open up a job in the Netherlands for a product manager. And then it come back and say, okay, well, we need to understand what grade, and I would tell them what grade and what the pay range is. And I might say, well, actually, what is the pay range for that grade? And just, as if I was speaking to a very smart human being who knew everything about opening up a job rec, then couldn't we get an assistant to do that? So it's got advantages about communicating in your language. You don't have to find the right web page to go to or click through. You just say what you want and it comes in. And of course, you're not tied to a screen. I mean, you could be doing this in your car or through your headphones or whatever it might be. So, I think it's an exciting area to be involved in. Now, within Oracle, there's a couple of areas where this is massively important. For example, customer service. We have our Oracle CX suite of products, like call center, B2C, or Service Cloud. And of course, people are quite often waiting on queues to speak to an agent who looks into a back-end system and gives you information. The person you speak to on the phone doesn't really know where your parcel is. They just look in a system. So, why don't we cut the wait out and just ask a digital assistant, where's my parcel? It can look in the same system as the human is, and at least free up the human to deal with the complex issues as well. And the other example, in work, wouldn't it be great to just say, hey, Oracle, book me tomorrow off? And it just happens. I don't have to find the right page or whatever, or, how do I order a phone? What's the policy for expensing in-room, movies when I'm in a hotel? Just ask and you get the answer. So, the idea of digital assistants and what they can do, I think is a wonderful evolution of where we're going. So what do we build? And I'm going to introduce this digital assistant we developed called Arty. And it's important because for a number of reasons. It was developed and still is being developed, an ongoing development over the past almost 2 years. We've been building Arty. It's been important for us because it is an exemplar of a digital assistant, we hope. I mean, we're always learning, doesn't get everything right, but what we're trying to do is raise the bar on both what a conversational experience can be and also how you implement a great conversational experience. Now, rather than us developing just another pizza bot like we do in the demos, could we create something that's actually really useful that people will use in real life? So we come up with the idea is, what about a digital assistant to help you learn about digital assistants? So this is what Arty is, and I'm going to jump to a demo of Arty at the moment, and here's Arty. It's embedded. This is the live documentation page for our product, and here's Arty, and I'll reload the page and come in, and Arty sits down here on the right hand corner, blinking away, and then just to give you an idea, after about 10 seconds or so, Arty says, look, if you want to chat, we can chat, and we can open up and chat to Arty. Now, again, one of the things we're trying to do, and I'll talk about this in a second, is best practices for something called conversation design, good conversational engagement. If I was to phone Patrick and I dial his number and Patrick picks up the phone and doesn't say anything, I'm kind of like, hello, is anyone there? What's happening? There's a rules of engagement that when you phone someone, they pick up the phone and say, hi, it's Patrick, how can I help you? And the digital assistant's doing that as well. It's introducing who the digital assistant is. It is a digital assistant, it's not a real human. How you can access help systems, and what kind of things it can do. Questions about developing digital assistants. So I'm going to ask it something. What is a digital assistant? And it's come back and said, okay. And one thing I'll talk about this in a second. We've created a personality for Arty. Arty, as you can see from the icon, is a kind of robot character, and Arty's tone of voice is kind of, if you think of Data in Star Trek Next Generation, is that kind of quite formal, stilted. We did that for a reason that I'll talk about, but we have developed a personality around. So which of these themes to you wish to pursue? Digital assistant definition, and there we've got an answer. Now, we didn't want to duplicate the documentation here. What Arty does is he guides you, answers questions, but also guides you. So, I would encourage you to peruse this overview. And if I click on this overview here, then I get taken to the documentation page, which actually has an overview of digital assistants there as well. And we've also got other things. There's a presentation, which is opened up in another slide. So it's linking to all our assets, including the official documentation as well. Now I can ask things like, do you have any more on this? And something Arty does is that, it will also, we've incorporated search capabilities as well. So if we want to find out any more, and I could say this any way I choose, but do you have any more on this? And Arty's gone through and searched a whole bunch of resources we have, including documentation, blog articles, to find other related articles about this topic. And Arty says, I'm hopeful this may help. If it's not helpful, tell me, and I said, this is cool. And I can chat, and Arty will deal with kind of small talk as well. A couple other examples, and I'm going to go into voice now. What is an entity? So there's a couple of things you know, Arty says we can help you here. Here's what an entity is, but there's actually types of different entity. There's built-in or custom entities. So tell me about custom entities. And there it's answered the question. So it's given me some guidance and I've answered, or I could have clicked the button and it's given me some more information. I can also ask questions very specifically about, you know, problems, you know, how might I extract a person's name? And this example, there's a you know, to extract the name from a you know, user input, we have an entity called the person entity. So you know, answers questions like that. Let's try another something else. How can I deploy my bot to iPad or Android? Now, if you think about this question, I've actually asked two questions. How can I deploy my bot to an iPad? And how can I deploy my bot to Android? So I've asked two questions there. But it's, you know, Arty's being smart here, recognize, if you don't mind, could we focus on one of the built-in channels for now? That's iPad or Android. And obviously it's recognized that iPad is an iOS device. Android here, and I could actually say it's for iPad, and it recognizes that iPad is, because it's, you know, it's intelligent. We can see exactly what we want, and it's Arty's job is to work out when I say iPad, actually, well, that's iOS, so we understand those things as well. So I want to know about entity slotting. We've also done a thing where we bring in things like videos. So as well as this channel linking us into the documentation, we can also pull videos in here as well. But you know, I watched this video and it's actually, it's no help for me at all. So I'm going to tell Arty that this is not really helpful. We're having a little bit of a network slowness. There we go. Now, my sincere apologies if I'm not helping request your accounts. May I request you share your email address for the purposes of logging it? So, you know, we will always, or Arty will always get things wrong. So how do we deal with it getting wrong? So it apologizes because it wasn't helpful. I put in my email address, grant.ronald@oracle.com. It says thank you. But if I go to Slack now and I go to the Slack channel over here, you will notice that, and let me scroll down to our latest message. There we go here. You wanted to know about entity slotting, but the answer wasn't helpful. So me as part of the development team have immediately got an alert to Arty, from Arty, that something has not worked. And again, this is you know, talking about how we build conversational assistants in the real world. You know, you will get things wrong. Your bot will be dumb and it needs to get smarter. So one of the things we're doing in getting smarter is that we're alerting in real time the development team so they can look at this and go, actually, this is something we need to fix, or we don't need to fix. And I can just say, look, we're not going to fix that because it's just a test. Or I could have automatically logged the Jira ticket. At the moment, we're thinking of that, but we just put it into Slack as well. So last couple of things I'll show you, you know, let me show you something like this. How do I integrate with Service Cloud? So in this case, we've got some information about linking to Service Cloud, but you know, how, you know, which way of integrating to Service Cloud? You can, there's a couple of questions here, but I'm not going to answer this question. I'm going to ask something else. How much does ODA cost? Now, like natural conversation, I'm not forced to continue a conversation down a path. I've asked a question in the middle of talking about Service Cloud. I've actually said, how much does this cost? We answer that question, then we say, I believe we're discussing the topic of the basics of customer service integration. Please choose one of these options. Well, look, I'm not really interested anymore, so I'm gonna leave that. The other thing that might have been interesting, you know, I've got a Scottish accent, so sometimes things get misunderstood, but how much does ODA cost? It understood that when I said ODA, that was ODA. And the reason it understood that is because our speech to text language models, we've also trained using the data that we train Arty with. So it understands that ODA is actually a term that this bot is likely to hear, and so it learns. Now, why is that important? Think about Alexa. Alexa's pretty good, understands things, but would it understand ODA? Would it understand CAT, meaning like key account, or CAD, key account director in Oracle? So there's terminology that's specific to the enterprise that would quite often be not working in a more commercial system, but we can train our speech to text, our speech recognition models using the data that's particular to your domain. Last couple of things. Let's say I go application initiated conversation. Because Arty doesn't know everything, we've got to come up with a strategy in how you deal with failure. So again, with a question like this, Arty's not been trained yet to understand what application initiated conversations are. But what we will do is we'll fall back on search. So again, we've searched the documentation, and lo and behold, you know, we can find probably one of the articles in here using the documentation search as well. So yeah, bot reaching out. So here's the article, and if I open it up, I can find out the right article. So that's another important thing to be able to say, bring in what we call this the long tail problem. So for all, you know, you can maybe deal with 10, 20% of your FAQs, but for the other 80%, how do you deal with that? And we can do things like search. So this is great. And again, I can talk, you know, quite casually to, you know, are you a bot? And anything else, you know, we might want to ask. Now, the very last thing I'll show you, if I ask a question like, what is NLP? And then I'll say, do you have any tutorials? And there is an answer. So here's a bunch of tutorials. Okay. Now, let me show you the last thing, which is, can I build a bot in Spanish? We do support a variety of languages. I'm going to ask the same question again. Do you have any tutorials? Exact same question, different answer. Because the conversation is contextually aware. So here we were talking about NLP, natural language processing. And then I ask about tutorials, and here's the answer. But when I started talking about building a bot in different languages, and I asked the same question, we got a different answer. So contextually aware, which again is something really important in conversations that, you know, I might ask, you know, where's the store that's nearest to Foster City? And I get an answer. Then I say, does it have a pharmacy? We need to understand that it responds to or relates to something else. So that's contextual awareness. So anyway, those are all the features of the digital assistant that we developed called Arty. And you know, you can play with it, you can ask it anything you want, you know, knock yourself out. So how do we build that? And this is how we build any production quality digital assistant. And it's worth saying that this was actually built as a side project from my team. So, you know, we're doing a day job. I said it was 2 years we've been building it, but we released the first release up after about 8 months. But it is something we have been doing as a side project with everything else. The first thing we do is what's called a CDX workshop, conversational design experience. And what we just do is what will a conversation look like? You know, one of the things I had to ask the team is, why is this conversation assistant better than going to the web page and doing Control F to search? And that is something we had to keep thinking about. Why is a conversation assistant good? And I see this when I get a lot of people building digital assistants and I review them and I look at them and I go, it would be easier just to go to the website. You know, you've got to keep thinking, why is conversational better than a web app? And if it's not better than a web app, then don't do it. It's the first thing. So we look at what a conversation is going to look like. What's the personality of the bot? How does it deal with ambiguity when things go wrong? How does it, you know, feed back to engineering that things are wrong? How does it apologize? These kind of things. And its profile, its character profile. As I said, we picked something, quite an extreme personality, very robotic. It doesn't understand jokes. It doesn't understand humor, but there was a deliberate reason around that. I mean, you can ask Arty about jokes and you'll get some responses. Similarly, if you swear at Arty, you know, Arty will deal with that in the Arty profile, the Arty character. So once we've done that, we had to think about, well, how are we going to partition Arty and build Arty out? Because we have this concept in Oracle Digital Assistant, which is our cloud platform for building this, of skills. And a skill, like an Alexa skill, is a group of related use cases. So we build those out together. And then, you know, what questions do we want? What use cases do we want Arty to cover? Because again, Arty cannot answer everything, but we had to decide what it will focus on. And then what other common features? Things like search capabilities, integrating with Slack, small talk. The fact that I can ask, are you a bot, and it deals with it, is because we created a module for dealing with small talk, you know, chit chat as well. And other things like, you know, how do we integrate it into the channel? You can see it, you know, obviously links with the web page, and you click a link and you can still read the page whilst you're still in the bot as well. We're all common features that we decided to scope out. And then the development was really kind of typical weekly sprints, thinking about naming conventions, how we versioned this, testing strategies, the typical kind of software development life cycle as well. And this is the overall architecture of Arty. So we have this concept of the Arty Digital Assistant, which is what I was communicating with. Within there are 16 different skills, and these are kind of topic areas. So for example, there is a skill for dealing with questions about HCM, because Oracle's got a big you know, offering around HCM and digital assistants around HCM. So you can ask it questions about Oracle HCM. You can ask it questions about pricing and getting trials. These are all part of the go-to-market skill. So we break the use cases down into related skills. So inside each skill might be the ability to answer 10, 12, 15 different questions. So we have about 200 questions overall that Arty can deal with. We have this integrated into the documentation page. So this is in the cloud in the middle. On the documentation page is our SDK that embeds the chat widget, which then talks there. And so when I ask a question to Arty, the first thing I do is it gets sent to the digital assistant, which then decides which skill is most likely or best placed to deal with that question. And if there's more than one skill that can deal with it, then we go to both of those skills and say, okay, can you understand this question? And if you both can understand the question, then we might have to put it to the user, which is one of the first things I showed you where, if we go back right to the beginning, when I asked the question, what's a digital assistant? Well, it said there's two ways I can answer that. I can give you the definition, or I can talk about the basics of the product. So it's what we call kind of smart menus or automatic disambiguation. So we've also got a backend. So running in a Kubernetes cluster, we have some JavaScript which integrates into Slack. We have an Elasticsearch cluster, which is all our blogs are indexed in there, which we scrape into the Elasticsearch. And we also reach out to documentation through a search API that we've got. We've also got other little things like typing indicators. We actually slow Arty down at some point so that it feels like somebody's typing back. And this is on the client side as well. So let's have a quick look at what this looks like in Oracle Digital Assistant, the product. So this is ODA, the cloud service. This is a development version of Arty, and you can see there are 17 now different skills. Each of those skills we'll look at in a second. And it's this digital assistant that's exposed on the channel, and I can test it out here. I can say hi. And just something to show you, if I say hi again, let me say hi again. You notice you get different messages. What we do is with a lot of our kind of standard messaging, we vary the responses so that it feels natural when you speak to the bot and ask it a particular question. You'll not get the same repeated answer like a kind of Groundhog Day. So anyway, let's ask some of those questions. You know, how do I integrate? Let's ask what is a digital assistant? And you can see this menu come up. And actually, if you look over here, without getting too technical, we can see that we've identified out of all of the skills that are in Arty, that question can 100% be dealt with by this skill, but no other skills can deal with it. Okay, that's fair. Then we look at within that digital, with that skill, which intent or which question is best suited to that answer. Well, there's actually two of them by 100%. So in this case, it automatically displays this message here. Now, I could phrase the question differently, and I might get a very slightly different response. I would like to understand what a digital assistant is. Actually, that's come up with a very similar. You can see here we've got some other skills that could answer that question, and you can see within the go-to-market skill, it could also answer the question. So again, that's why we're getting slightly product basics, digital assistant definition. Here we're getting two different menu options. That's because two different skills could answer that question for you because you phrased it slightly differently. Okay, so this is all routing automatically to the right skill, and this allows it easy to development because you can break it down into separate skills. But a couple of things that are really cool. Let me show if I want. How do you integrate the chatbot with Oracle Service Cloud? Because this is one of the examples I showed. Now, if I look here in the conversation, and then the digital assistant asks me a question, but then I asked the question about was how much does ODA cost? And then I'm going to ignore this again and ask a different question. Can I deploy my bot to Facebook? And if you look on the right here, you can actually see how the conversation is automatically jumping between skills. So here we're in the common skill, what's called the common skill. And then I asked a question about digital assistant. So here I went over to the digital assistant skill to answer that. But then my next question was about Service Cloud, and it jumped into the Service Cloud skill to answer that. And these are just steps that the code's going through. And then rather than answering the question, I asked a question about cost, and I jumped to the go-to-market skill. And then at the end of that, I jumped to asking a question about deploying it on Facebook, and it jumped to the channels skill. And then we get to the end and I say, no, actually, I do want to know about integration with Service Cloud. So I'll click on that link there. And we've gone back. So here you can see we had this topic, we've jumped to this topic, we've jumped to Service Cloud, we've jumped to pricing, we've jumped to another topic about Facebook, and now we've jumped back to answer the question about Service Cloud. And then I say, great. And we jump back to our common skill, because the common skill is the one that deals with small talk. So this jumping about of conversations, the right skill deals with the conversation, and it moves relatively seamlessly between conversations. You can set up parameters that define, you know, when I move between one conversation and another, should I ask the user if they want to move, or do I always do it seamlessly? We can do that here as well. So this is the overall kind of digital assistant with the skills in here. I'll talk about the building blocks of each of the skills in a second as well. So when you build a skill or a chat bot, there are 4 or 5 building blocks. The first thing is called the intent. So that is, what is the use case that gets mapped to user input? So when I say order pizza, there's an order pizza intent, for example, in a pizza skill. If I say, I don't want the pizza anymore, then that probably maps to a cancel pizza intent. So you define the intent that you want the chatbot to support, and each intent is typically a use case or a question that the bot would support. Okay, so booking a holiday might be an intent. What's the holiday policy is another intent, but the difference is booking a holiday probably takes you through a whole conversation. You know, when's the start date, when's the end date, why are you taking this time off, etc. You know, you don't have enough holiday, I can't take it, etc. Whereas what's the policy is just a question and answer, but they're both intents. The entity gives you is a variable in the intent. So if I say something like, I want to order a large pepperoni pizza, then the intent is order pizza, but pepperoni and large is the variable, because Patrick might order a small veggie pizza, so his gets something different. So the entities are any variables which you define and we can pick out of the sentence. And again, it works on natural language. So if I say, I want to order a pizza tomorrow, it would recognize that tomorrow is Thursday, the 20th of January. But if I said, I want to order a pizza Christmas Day, it would recognize that's the 25th. Or if I want to order a pizza next Thursday, it would recognize that's the 26th or 27th, whatever. So you can define these in very much natural language as well. There's a conversation dialogue, which I'll show you in a second, which allows you to define the back and forward as well, and how you handle what we call the unresolved intent. So when the bot doesn't understand something, you could just put a message that says, I don't understand. But you know, our advice and best practices is, you know, trying to do something before you do the, you know, you pull up the white flag and say, I don't understand, I surrender. And you know, what we're doing in Arty is things like search, these kind of things as well. So let's look at one of these skills. Let's look at the channels skill. And it's pretty straightforward. Here are our intents. That's the questions that this skill can answer about channels. And the way the bot understands language is we train it. You know, for example, channel basics. Okay, so this intent is all about people asking questions. You know, what is a channel? What's it for? It's those type of questions. Now, how does the bot understand that? We train it with example phrases. So here you can see there's 114 different phrases about channels. You know, can you give me an overview of channels? Show me how to create a channel. But of course, if I ask the bot here, I'd like to know a little bit about how channels are built on ODA. It's understood that. But of course, if I do a search here, there's no phrase that's anything like that. I mean, there might be some, if I say about, I know a little bit, but built, let's look at the word built, for example. Actually, there's no words on built. Let's look at, oh, sorry, I'm looking here. No, create. Let's look at create. So it's interesting. I use the word build or built. I didn't, which it hasn't been trained with, but it's learned because I trained it with words about creating a channel. And it's learned that creating and building are pretty much the same thing. So, but it shows you how this is not, string matching. And we don't need masses of data, maybe 60, 70 utterances, but what we do is train the model to understand language, and it will also further learn from our own internal models beyond what you've trained it with. So as I said, I've used the word build, but I haven't actually used build in here at all as well. I mentioned that we have entities, so let's look at the built-in channels. Built-in channels has got an entity associated with it. If I look at that entity, you'll see it's basically a list of words here: Android, Facebook, Slack. And that's why if I ask a question like, I want to know about channels, but let's pick one of the phrases we've got for this. So built-in channels. It automatically shows me that list of channels to choose from, because I've defined that for this intent, I need to find a channel because in order to answer the question. But notice it's smart, because if I was to say, are there built-in channels for messaging platforms such as Facebook? Then it goes directly to the Facebook answer. It doesn't ask me for the choice because it recognizes I've said Facebook. And of course, again, it has synonyms built in. So if I was to say such as for an iPad, it would give me the answer for iOS and Apple, because if I look at the entity here, we've set up a bunch of synonyms for iOS, Apple, iPhone, iPad. And there's also some smarts in there as well, that if I've said for messaging platforms such as Facebook or iOS or Android, it automatically asks me to choose one. And the reason being is because in my entity, I've set multiple values off and a disambiguation prompt, and it will automatically ask me if, if you don't mind, appreciate if you could choose one. The other thing is we have different prompts as well. So if I say, we get a slightly different message, or not for that one. Sorry, let me try this again. So let's imagine I don't type in one of the valid values. I regret X is not a choice I've understood. We get a slightly different message. If you could choose one, and I get it wrong again. And it says, I shall endeavor one more time to get an answer from you, and I get it wrong for the third time. We seem to each input, await new input. So, we're not locking the user into getting the right thing. We're giving them different messages to try and, get a little bit more information in terms of helping them and guiding them as well. So this is all part and parcel. And the last thing I'll show here in terms of the implementation is we actually have a visual designer that we're about to release, but at the moment we have this markup language that defines the flow of a conversation. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, here we have something called a system intent, which gets the user input, and then if it thinks it was the built-in channels intent, then we go to this step here, built-in channels, which is down here, which sets a variable, and then it goes to answer prelude. Answer prelude is here, and that outputs a random message, because as you've maybe seen here, when we ask a question, I believe I can give you a positive. So there's a prelude to the answer, and we randomize that so you can get different answers each time. Next, short delay, and we actually slow Arty down sometimes for here 1.5 seconds to give people time to read and to kind of mimic the behavior that you have on a messaging platform where somebody might be typing and sending you a message and it's happening, so you get a typing indicator. And then it goes to this step here, which outputs all the types that are in the built-in channel entity. So if I was to add a new type of channel into this variable, then it would automatically be stamped out. That's exactly what you're seeing here. All the different entity values are being stamped out here just by this. So it's pretty straightforward. Then you have a switch statement, which, because we have a different answer based on what channel, if you ask Facebook, then we go to this component to output a message. And this actually is referencing a resource bundle, because we are preparing Arty to be multilingual. So rather than hard coding English strings, we put them into resource bundles here. And the resource bundles can be easily translated, and then it will pick up the correct resource bundle depending if you're speaking in French, German, whatever it might be that we plan to support. Okay, so so some of the things that are that we emphasize when people are building digital assistants that are super important. I demoed the non sequitur. That was where we jumped around conversation, and that's handled out the box. The contextual awareness, when I asked about a tutorial, I got a different answer depending on what we're talking about, and that happens out of the box as well, because the digital assistant gives a weighting based on the current conversation about which intent should resolve that. Auto disambiguation, I showed you, that's where if there are a couple of answers that fit, then we will present multiple options for the user to choose what's the right answer. Synonyms on the entity values, typing indicators. Oh, I didn't show the help carousel as well. If you're using the bot and you just don't know what to do, you could type help. And it will give you, first of all, it gives you contextual help. So help on the topic we're talking about, which is channels. But I can go back to overall help, and I can scroll through and I can see all the different things that Arty could, examples of the kind of things you can ask. And you can click on that and get the answer. But, to emphasize, I said help, but I should be able to ask, say anything, what can you do? And that's another way of triggering help by saying questions like, what can you do? Or I'm not sure what to do. Or, I suppose menu might even, I don't know. Let's see, there you go. Menu comes up with help as well. So, it's pretty smart in terms of we're not tying you to remembering keywords. It's all about you using natural language as well. So how do we test Arty? Because we don't know, how do we know Arty is getting smarter? There's two important things about testing the NLP, the natural language processing, is whenever we release a version of Arty, we look at the conversation logs of what people have been saying to Arty, and we use those to help retrain Arty. So if I go again back into Oracle Digital Assistant here, and I go to the digital assistant and click here, I can look at all the conversations that's been happening with Arty. And just so you know, when it says 14 minutes, this is the development version, not the version that's production. So that's why you're not seeing the conversations I've just had appearing here. But I can view these conversations, and if there's anything that's been asked to Arty that's Arty's not understood or didn't have a high confidence with, we can use those phrases to retrain Arty to get smarter. So we can train Arty to be smarter, but also our platform evolves and we add new features to the platform. So how do we know you're getting smarter or Arty's getting smarter? So we have tests. So we have a test suite in which we have phrases, and we have different types of tests. We have in-domain tests, which is if I ask a question like, what channels do you have, then that should resolve to the channel's built-in intent. But if I ask a question like, who swam the channel and who was the fastest person to swim the channel, which of course is not anything to do with this domain, that should be unresolved. So we're also making sure that certain phrases do resolve. We're also making certain phrases don't resolve because they shouldn't be resolved. We come up with random phrases and what we call neighbor testing. That's testing that the phrases from one skill are not understood or captured or used by phrases by other skills. Okay. And so we've created a bunch of test scripts, and I think if you go to, I think we've got them collated here. If I go to one of the skills, let's go to channels, test utterances. Here we have our test suites. So here's our in-domain test suite, and I can run these in it. That phrase should resolve to that intent, and I can choose, let's just choose a couple of them and run, set the confidence threshold. So we want 80% confident, and I run those tests, and there we can see all three passed. Now, what we do with these tests is we actually gather all our tests together and we run them in batch before we release the product. And this is actually what we see in this spreadsheet here. This is an older one. This is from Arty version 11. We're up to Arty version 13 now. But for each skill, we can look and see how many tests are passing. 88%. In our previous version, 88% were passing. This is good. We're not getting any worse. Any changes we're making. Here we've had a small drop in the pass rate, but here this one's higher than this one, so that maybe that's okay. And we can, we've changed the spreadsheet so that we get more data in there. But we also generate further tests, and we test skills against other skills tests. And so this combination gives us all these tests. And in fact, as I say, this is an older example, but we're now up to over 360,000 phrases that we test Arty with. So when we go production and we want to know that Arty version 14 is smarter than Arty version 13 or 12 or whatever, then we run these tests and we can compare and see what's happening. We can also do things like change our confidence threshold. If Arty was more confident or more precise, it only understood things if you were 99% certain, then what would that look like? Well, actually, what it would mean is some of our tests would fail now. We'll drop 17% because we need to be more accurate, is what we're saying. Whereas if we drop it down to 65, 67%, then we're getting more tests passing. But what it does is mean is that out of domain tests start to fail. Because if your bot is willing to give an answer to anything, then it means if people ask questions like, do you like pizza? It's going to try and answer it and often get it wrong. So there's a bit of a balancing act on where you set your kind of confidence thresholds at, and we're currently running at 80% in terms of our confidence thresholds. So that's kind of the summary on how we build this. And as I said, Arty itself is a real production digital assistant. So when we said at the title, building real production digital assistants, Arty is an example. However, Arty is probably bigger than anything that's being built at the moment. So Oracle are building a lot of digital assistants for things like HCM, ERP. There's some even on, if you go to the Oracle website, there's some. None of them are pushing the boundaries and using the best practices anywhere near that we're doing. And one of my jobs in Oracle is to tell people and show them that Arty is the blueprint. The way that you should be building digital assistants is this way, because we are quite frankly, the experts. So one of our jobs is using Arty not just as a useful assistant itself, but as an example of how everyone in our Oracle and also our customers should be building digital assistants. And here's some stats, since its launch, I think we're probably more than that now. We must be up to about 20 or 30,000 conversations. We've got a pass rate of about 84%, which we're pretty happy with. 16% unresolved, although we did find a reasonable answer in about 50% of those cases. And I've got to say, the domain of Arty in terms of answering technical questions is actually really tough, because you think about, if you're just asking about, what is digital assistant, that's pretty straightforward. But, we get people asking questions like, I want to implement an array, but the array doesn't seem to be working. What's wrong with my code? And, there's no way Arty can deal with that, but we get those questions. So it's a tough balancing act in terms of our expectations, but it's pretty good. I thought this was awesome. We were doing some training with a bunch of people. We had 857 people on the webinar, and we had 5 product managers were answering questions that were coming in the chat. And between the 5 of us, we answered about 10 questions an hour. It sounds about right. Arty answered 500 questions in that same time. And I thought that was a pretty cool indication of where the digital assistant was being successful. There's a whole bunch of stuff we're thinking of doing next for Arty, multi-language, giving a feedback component as well, multiple channels, so we can use it in Zoom and Slack. We have internal Slack channels where people ask questions about the product and we answer them. Now, one of the things we're looking at is embedding Arty as a Zoom app, as a Slack app, which means that Arty would first of all try to answer that question for them as well. So it's kind of pretty cool stuff. So if you want to try out Arty, you search on ODA documentation or bit.ly/ODA doc, and you can find that. So I wanted to leave some time for questions, and I do have some time. I don't know if there's anything come through in the chat. Nothing yet. Are there any questions people want to ask? Unmute. Happy to answer them now.
There are no questions at the moment, but let's give people some time to type.
Mm-hmm.
The 500 questions Arty answered, were those the easy ones, and did you have to do the hard ones?
No, actually.
It was pretty much the same.
Yeah, I mean, we get, what's interesting, what's one good thing is, yes, there are maybe, you could say, easy question. How do I get a trial? But what's nice is that Arty gives the consistent answer. The problem if you ask a PM, one of us, they might say, oh, you can just get the $300 free trial. Or another PM might say, oh, if you drop me an email, I can maybe get you a kind of free trial or something. And someone else might say something else. So no, it wasn't necessarily the difficult questions as such, but it was just, it dealt with that volume pretty well. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, yes, it frees us up if there are really complex questions. And we did say to people, try to use Arty first. And if Arty doesn't answer, then post the question. So, but yeah.
Pretty cool stuff.
It really is, and I don't know if you've seen recently in the the news blog that Oracle's supposed to be doing this huge acquisition of medical company,
Yeah.
and in that press release they talk about digital assistants as being one of the primary use cases. Again, you think in a medical environment, especially with voice as well, that you can simply just ask who's the next patient, and what's their medical history, and even again things like, and this was actually something came at the beginning of the pandemic. We were involved in a couple of projects with digital assistants, very urgent projects, because of course we wanted people to not touch things, and so voice suddenly became a really important aspect for accessing patient records, that people didn't have to touch screens or type on computers. So it's kind of the whole last 2 years has opened up a huge number of use cases. The other thing is people trying to access information about COVID standards and everything like that, and of course searching websites, not find the right information, or trying to phone up their HR department and saying, how can I get access to VPN because I'm working at home. The chatbot, we were doing so much work in those early days of the pandemic to deal with those kind of requests that people could simply ask and the bot would understand. So yeah,
does Oracle have its own speech-to-text engine?
Yes. Yeah. So what I was showing you with Arty here is their own speech-to-text. So whenever I ask something like, I'd like to know if you are a human or are you a chatbot, that phrase is going off into our cloud service to be translated into text, and that comes back. And furthermore, we trained the model. An interesting story with my Scottish accent, sometimes when I say bot as in chatbot, it understood it as boat as in ship, B-O-A-T. So that was obviously wrong, because Arty's nothing to do about ships. So what we do is we then trained the speech to text model with all the phrases within Arty. And of course, within Arty, there are lots of phrases with B-O-T, bot, nothing to do with boat, B-O-A-T. So it started to learn that when I say a word like bot, maybe it's boat, maybe it's bot, but having been trained, it knows that there's a high probability it's B-O-T and not ship.
It knows it because of the context of Arty.
Exactly.
Nothing to do
Exactly.
with ships.
And you think of in Oracle technology or in business, the acronyms that you use. I said, in Oracle, CAD is Key Account Director. Well, of course, if you said who's the CAD for Qualogy, it would wouldn't understand what CAD is, but you could train the model to say that in this domain, if I hear CAD, then it's possibly KAD and not something else.